Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this, the fifth in the Royal Society's You and Your Planet series, the first to be held online. So it's a bit of an experiment for us all. The idea of these events is to inspire a positive vision of the future where human activity protects and enhances the health of the planet. We are bringing together experts to discuss how this can be achieved and how we can live alongside nature in a sustainable and mutually beneficial way. We've got a wonderful panel joining us for today's discussion, and I am, as I hope you are, you will be because you've signed up, very excited to hear what they've got to say. Thank you very much indeed to everybody who's submitted questions already. Those are what we've used to kind of create the structure and the shape for today's discussion, but we want everybody to be involved this evening, and we have we're using an online app called Slido, which you should see in the video description. Do sign up for Slido now. It's very easy. You just put Slido in, put it in Google, and then put in the code that we've given you. Look here, I've got it here. You probably can't see it, but here on my phone, and that allows you to ask questions and to follow some thrilling online polls that we will be running during the course of tonight. So please send us your questions and I'll see them. They'll flash up on my screen and we can get the panelists talking about them. So you can very much continue to shape the discussion as we go on. We have got captioning available this evening. If you'd like to see the captions, please click the subtitles closed caption button in the bottom bar. If you want to tweet during the discussion, please do, and use the hashtag #YouAndThePlanet, please, for that. So just in case you're wondering, my name is Justin Rowlatt. I'm the Chief Environment Correspondent at the BBC. So it's my remit to cover, well, in theory, all things environmental, but at the moment, the focus has been mostly on kind of tackling one of the biggest issues, climate change and environmental degradation around the world. I've been doing it for about a year, so I'm still feeling, I mean, a year is quite a long time, but I still feel like I'm finding my way in what is a big subject. I've covered the issue before. People in the UK may remember a series I did for Newsnight about just over a decade ago, where I was dubbed the BBC's ethical man. It was quite an entertaining thing to do. But let me now introduce the panel. We've got a great panel, as I said. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. So let's start first with Pete Smith. Pete, who are you and what interests and enthusiasms do you bring to this discussion?
I'm Pete Smith from the University of Aberdeen. I've been working on climate change for about 25 years now, and with a particular sort of focus on how we use the land, so agriculture and forestry, and what that can contribute to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So what I'm particularly interested in for tonight's discussion is how we use nature to both benefit the climate and to benefit biodiversity.
Perfect, thanks Pete. Now Margaret Tuddy, tell us who you are, where you are and what you bring to in terms of interest and enthusiasms to this discussion.
Thanks, Justin. I'm Margaret Tuddy. I am in South Africa at the moment. I'm at Stellenbosch University. I'm an academic. I'm a chemical engineer. And like Pete, I'm interested in land. My interest is in the impact of mining and on land, on water, and on the communities that are impacted by mining activities, particularly here in Africa, which is very dependent on mining economically. I'm very interested in the conversation for climate change and also interested in what is happening with the developing world and what is the impact of these transitions for people in the developing world.
Margaret, thank you very much indeed. Jim Skier in Aberdeen, what do you study and what interests do you bring to this discussion?
I'm Jim Ski, and I spent most of my time at the moment being a co-chair of one of the working groups of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the one that looks at reducing emissions. And in my spare time, when I have any, I'm also chairing the Just Transition Commission for the Scottish Government. And in spite of of Justin's introduction on my accent, I'm actually sitting in Earl's Court in London at the moment rather than up in Scotland, but you would never have guessed that.
We would never have guessed it. You could have kept that illusion going, Jim. Harriet Bulkley, tell us, where you are and what kind of enthusiasms you bring to this discussion.
Thanks, Justin, and yeah, evening everybody. Nice to be here. So I'm in Durham, and I am a professor here in the geography department, but I also work at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. So I don't get there in person so much as the moment for the obvious reasons, but yeah, that's one thing that the virtual world allows us to do, is to work in many places at once. So yeah, and my history, my enthusiasm here, I guess it's really about cities. So I've worked on how cities can respond to climate change over the last 25 years. It was a lucky accident as part of my PhD that I stumbled across the idea that cities could be a really important part of the answer to climate change. And I've since then been tracking what it is that's happening in cities, what they're doing, what solutions they can generate for us. And I'm leading a project funded by the European Union at the moment, looking at how we can work with nature in cities to address multiple sustainable development goals.
So an excellent panel with a diverse range of interests to discuss the issues today. Can I draw your attention back to Slido, the app that I've got here? We want to hear from you what you think a better future looks like. You need to go onto any web search application that you have, put the word Slido in, put the key number 5842 in, enter your name, and then you should see our first question for a poll. And our question is, what do you think a better future looks like? So that's the first poll. We'll do the answers as we go along, and we've got a couple more polls in store for you. We want to get you guys talking as well. We very much want this to be shaped by you. So do sign up if you feel so inclined, and do take part in the polls, and also fire questions off to us. But let's kick off the discussion immediately. And rather mischievously, I would like to kind of question the kind of basis of our the first area that we want to look at, the question of what is a just transition. And what I would like to ask the panelists is whether they think justice, fairness, that idea necessarily is married to the idea of the transition, the move away from carbon-based fuels to tackle global warming. It seems to me objectively that there's a kind of, we may feel all sorts of strong moral reasons why we think justice and fairness are important, but they are not necessarily linked to the success or otherwise of a transition. A transition is a sort of practical process of stopping emitting greenhouse gases. It doesn't require justice to be part of it, yet we often put these two things together. Now, I'm going to start with you, Harriet, because I know I know you've spent the last 3.5 days in a discussion group talking about exactly this, the just transition. So are justice and the transition necessarily linked in your mind, Harriet?
Well, Justin, I think, it would be possible, theoretically, conceptually, to imagine a transition that isn't just. Of course, that's possible. But for me, it's a question about maybe not so much whether it's necessary, but it is about desirability. I mean, for me, a just transition is about making sure that those people who've got the most responsibility for the situation we're in now and who've got the most capacity to act are encouraged to do so and are held accountable for that. So do we need everybody to act in exactly the same way in order to get out of the mess that we're in? I don't think so. I think we need some people, some of those of us who, some of you may have seen the papers in the last few weeks carried a story that said that the wealthiest in the world make the most contribution to greenhouse gas emissions and the most contribution to the destruction of nature. So from my perspective, a just transition would mean that those of us who make the most impact take the most responsibility for acting. And it would also mean that there isn't any harm done to others as we go through this process of change. But I'm sure others have got other contributions to make also on that point.
Jim, I'm going to go to you next because you're the Professor of Sustainable Energy at Imperial College in London. And, it seems to me that, we seem to be at a tipping point where this might be happening, that renewable energy is now competitive with other forms of energy and may very well soon be cheaper than other forms of energy, at which point renewable energy becomes the natural place for investors to put their money. And you might see a considerable distance of the transition. This is quite optimistic, but you might see the transition happening without the requirement for governments to get involved and for really what we could describe broadly as capitalism to undertake the process on its own, because it's the profitable thing to do. Now, that is an optimistic scenario, but it's a scenario that lots of people are talking about at the moment. Now, if that happens, and investors simply invest in renewable energy and squeeze the carbon out of the productive system, then we don't really have to worry about justice, do we? It's happening anyway.
Well, I'm an energy person, but I was involved in managing the IPCC special report on land, and I am now truly humbled as I've moved from the energy sector to land, just how difficult some of the other stuff actually is, because it involves people at a much more basic level. And quite frankly, Justin, I think renewable energy is the easy bit of it. You get a few big players to take a small number of actions, and you get gigawatts of offshore wind out in the North Sea. But the irony is that we've now set targets like the Paris Agreement that are so ambitious that all of that just isn't enough. We need to do other things as well. We need behavioral changes. We need changes in the way that land is managed, and all of these things interact with each other. And the only way of getting that, I mean, there's a principled reason for having a just transition, because it's just the right thing to do in a liberal democracy, and procedural justice and engaging people is just right. But there's also a pragmatic reason, because if we don't actually keep people engaged, we will not be able to make all the kind of changes that are needed to meet these targets. That's the trouble. We can't just focus on one or two things. We need to do everything given the ambition.
Margaret, where are you on this? Because you work practically on these issues of justice, particularly around mining, don't you? In Africa, Zimbabwe originally, now in South Africa. So you're kind of, you've got a kind of, a ground level perspective on this. How important is it to bring communities on board in order to deliver the kind of behavior changes that we need if we really are going to successfully tackle climate change?
Yeah, Justin, I think it's really important for us to have the communities involved. I mean, when you think about it, whenever you implement change, there's going to be people that are going to be affected by it. So we think about, when you look at the past and the carbon economy that we've had, there are societies that have been built around that. So there are people who are in mining communities whose livelihoods have been built around this. So if we make a shift and forget these people, we are going to create social problems which we will have to deal with after we've dealt with saving the planet. So the problems just keep compounding. So we absolutely have to bring people into the conversation.
Margaret, thank you very much indeed. Pete, I'm getting strong pushback for this suggestion that we divorce the two. Where do you stand on this?
Let me join the chorus of rebellion. I think we absolutely have to include justice. We know that there are a number of pathways that we could possibly get to net zero by 2050, and all of them are extremely challenging and extremely difficult. So we have to take people with us. But more than that, if we don't include justice at the very beginning when we're thinking about it, we could end up on a pathway that locks us in to something that doesn't provide justice, that doesn't provide equity in the future. And we get 10 years down the line, we've invested in all the wrong technologies and all the wrong solutions, and then where are we? So we have to include justice at the very beginning and consider it at the outset, because it'll be too late to do that later, and we'll get locked onto a pathway that isn't appropriate.
Okay, now I feel thoroughly chastised, but you have the opportunity yourselves as the audience, please, to contribute to this, because our first poll question is, who do you think should be responsible for creating a future that is sustainable and fair? So clearly there's a just transition embedded in that question. So have a look at the multiple choice questions there, and please respond. We'll give you the answers, we'll get feedback from there, and we'll see whether people do think that justice and tackling climate change are inextricably linked in the way that we've suggested at the beginning here. Now, most of the questions that I'm drawing on now are from questions that were submitted earlier, but we do want to hear from you, so bang your questions onto Slido if you can. But let's start with a question that we got earlier, which is this: can we harness current technology and scientific knowledge to identify and address how a growing population can live healthily and fairly within the boundaries of one planet? So can we use technology and scientific knowledge to support the growing population on the planet? I'm going to direct that to you, Pete, because you deal with soils and agriculture, and therefore maybe you'll have a bit of insight in that sector of how we can sustainably move forward with a growing population.
Yeah, so we're already pushing up a bunch of sustainability limits for the planet, what's called the planetary boundaries, and we're currently exceeding quite a few of those. So we're not in a position where we will arrive at an unsustainable future at some stage in the future. We're already living unsustainably. So we really have to consider how we manage that sustainably. A good example is our current food system. Our current food system currently doesn't feed everybody healthily, and it emits up to a third of greenhouse gas emissions on the planet. So we really need to change how we address that. So science and technology contributes to assessing that, but science and technology can't do it all by itself. There has to be changes in demand, more plant-based foods, less waste. So all of those things that we need science and technology, but we also need behavioural change. So we need both.
Excellent, Pete. Margaret, we need behaviour change as well, right? How do we deliver behaviour change? It's all very well to talk about justice and fairness and making people do the right thing, but how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And what I think of at the moment is the pandemic. We had a tragedy, we had a crisis, and everybody, having realized that there's a crisis, immediately rose up to the task and decided we have to do something different, we have to change. I think that what we need is more education of people to understand that there is a very real problem. There might be an opportunity at the moment where people are more aware of what's happening globally in order to bring that home, and maybe we can actually take advantage of that. But it's all about education and getting people to understand that there is a problem so that they can act.
Right, great, thank you, Margaret. Listen, we've had a question, and I'm going to direct this to you, Jim. Josh has got on Slido, as I'd urge you all to do, and he's asked, how do we remove power from the large multinational corporations that effectively dictate decision-making? Well, I'd like to ask you a slightly different question. It's a little bit unfair, Josh, and if you don't like it, you can come back on Slido and tell me. I'd like to say, do we want to remove power from them, and are they the key in dictating what happens? Jim, what do you think?
Well,
disenfranchise them?
I'll have to say, Justin, that was the question I was going to answer anyway in response to it, because I'm just noticing on the Slido, who's responsible for this? And the dominant answer is everybody. And actually, whether you like it or not, the multinational corporations are actually part of that picture, overall. And many of them are actually, doing things perhaps more at the consumer end of the industry rather than the primary production end, are doing quite a lot of good stuff. I mean, the interesting thing for me actually is the oil and gas industry and where it actually sits at the moment, because lots of people are talking about disinvestment. But one of the truths is we will not reach our Paris targets unless we are prepared to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to some degree to compensate for the other kind of things that would be happening. And the people who have the skills to do that, whether you like it or not, are in many of the large multinational corporations at the moment. So getting that way of trying to it's more a case of redirecting what multinational corporations are doing. Can they move from the fossil fuel industry into renewables? Can they employ the skills that they have already to put carbon dioxide under the ground? All of these things are there, and we need them, actually. Whether you like them or not, we need them.
That is a point that's very well made, and very explicitly, some leading oil companies are saying that. So most notably BP, but Total as well. We know that Shell is considering doing similar things. And they're saying, look, we're really good at big project management in exactly the kind of places where we're going to need wind turbines, like, for example, here in Britain in the North Sea. They're very useful. And the other point that I think people ignore is that we consume the products of oil. There's a three-way, agreement between us, the oil companies, and the governments, to say, it's perfectly acceptable to use oil and diesel to power your cars, and we're part of that compact. And I always feel that it's a bit, this idea that we blame the oil company. We've got to see how they sit in society. Harriet, do you? I'm sounding like a rabid capitalist here. Harriet, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the consumption and production are intimately connected, right? I mean, the things that we consume are the things that are produced. The more that we consume them, the more that they will be produced, right? So we have to think about what it is that we want to consume and why, and make some, potentially end up making some different choices there. I mean, I think some of the actions that large corporations are taking in relationship to climate change and in relationship to nature are really interesting, really exciting. We've got IKEA, for example, becoming a furniture lending company. We've got Walmart in the US saying that it wants to start being a regenerative company, so that you've got Google thinking about what its past carbon debts are and what it should do about those. And those are sort of really kind of big ideas, right? They're not only just business models, but they're really kind of different ideas about how we might run our economy. And I think it's only going to become from those are kind of economic actors that we're going to get big thinking and new ways of doing those kind of things at scale. But that's not to say that those companies shouldn't also be held to account for whether they're really putting, their money where their mouth is and their action where it needs to be done. So we have to continue to hold them to account, to kind of push the barrier, push their boundaries about what they're prepared to do for the environment. But at the same time, we also have to kind of celebrate the fact that they are spaces of innovation and that we do need them as part of the transition.
I think that's a really important point. But there is an interesting thing in all of this. We say they need to be held to account. They need to, we need to make sure their actions, are reasonable, that they're doing what they say they're doing, that kind of thing. And Margaret, I wonder, who is this we who sits in judgment on them? How on earth do you have systems where, where the behavior of a company is judged whether it's appropriate or not? These are really kind of difficult things. Who should sit in judgment? Who makes decisions about what a transition should look like, and even more complex, what a just transition looks like?
Yeah, so the easy answer is everybody. And how does that happen? There are many different ways in which that happens. I'll give you an example of the mining communities. There's a concept called social license to operate that exists in mining, which is communities pushing back about what big corporations do with their land and with their resources. So you have communities that have a voice that's able to change big companies. And I think that that's a very good example of what we can do as a collective to be able to usher in this just transition. The realization that there are voices at all levels, leadership up to the consumers, we who are creating the demand, we have a voice, and we are able to really direct the path of this transition.
No, I think that's right. There's Meryl Batchelder, I think it is, maybe she'll correct me, but she says, and this is related concept, if education is key, how can we ensure climate change education in schools and the community is promoted? And again, you've got this sense, education's such a sensitive area. I'm going to direct this to you, Pete. Education's such a sensitive area. Who decides what the education agenda of climate change should be, particularly, and this is a bit mischievous of me, but particularly if we also include concepts like fairness and justice, which are very contested. So it's tough enough saying, how on earth do we transition the economy? But if you're also saying, what constitutes a fair society? Well, that's been the subject of political debate since the dawn of mankind. So, how on earth do we resolve these kind of things, Pete, in a way in which we get popular buy-in for the ideas?
Yeah, well, I suppose we're lucky in this country in that we have climate change on the curriculum. So we don't, unlike the US, for example, where it's still so contested, climate change is on the curriculum and kids learned about it at school. And there's money available from the government. I live in Scotland, and there's money available from the Scottish government to set up community climate change actions. So small communities can bid in for a few grand to put together programs on climate change. So those sorts of things can happen. With respect to teaching justice, I think that we can get people talking about it. We don't necessarily have to tell people what the right answer is, but getting people talking about it, asking them that what they think would be fair, is a way to engage people in that sort of discussion. So I think it's something that we can do, and we do within schools. We may be able to do it better, but it's something that we're doing a lot better than in some other countries.
That's a very good answer. That was clearly the right answer. Let's discuss it. That has to be the right answer, which is what we're doing here. We want to continue the discussion. Get on, Slido. We've got some really good questions. I'm going to come to one in a moment. But first, let's have the results of our first poll. I'm testing this technology out, so let me see if I can. Look, I've got my phone here, so I'm looking at the poll result. And we've got a resounding result from our poll. Very, very strong result. Who should be responsible for creating a future that is sustainable and fair? Is it government? Is it business? Is it individuals, communities? None of the above? Or is it everyone? And 77% of you say, and quite a good turnout, 134 people, 77% of you say everyone should be responsible, which again, like your previous answer, Pete, is a very good and diplomatic and clearly a strong answer. Now, let me come back to the question that I liked. Dominique Sandy says, Harriet, what particular role do cities have in transitioning towards a more sustainable economy, society? How is their role different from others, if indeed it is? And I direct that at you because I think you have some expertise in the role of cities.
Yes, I do. And I will try to give an answer which isn't 25 years long. But I mean, the first thing to say is that when we look at where energy or related emissions come from globally, then we can see that about 70 or 80% of greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from the energy related sector. So that's heating, electricity, transport, industrial production, they come from cities. And so that means that if we want those emissions to change, we need to take action in the urban environment. And I mean, cities have got all sorts of interesting things about them, but I'll just put three things on the table. Firstly, they're spaces of community, right? They're spaces of collective action. And so different groups of different parts of society can get together and take action. Secondly, they often have independent political leadership and leaders who can raise taxes, make plans, do regulation. That's also really important. And thirdly, it's a place where we see increasingly forms of partnership between business and civil society and government, the sort of tripartite that you raised earlier, Justin. We see partnerships emerging between those three sets of actors at the urban scale, specifically around climate change, in ways that I think is harder to do at a different scale. Because when it's your city, your community, and your economy, it's easier to get people around the table and to work out what they can do together. So those are three things that we see happening at an urban level, which means they've got a lot of responsibility, but they've also got a lot of capacity to act. And yeah, I could talk more, but I will leave it there. But yeah, thanks for raising the cities question because they're central to this.
I want to hold on to the cities question, that where people are. But next, I want to introduce our next poll. And our poll is, to what extent do you agree that with change, it will be possible to have a future that protects both people and our planet? So do you believe that there is a future available to us that protects both people and the planet? So a really big question there. That's on Slido. You can go in and comment right now. And also you can fire off questions for us. But I want to stay with the cities thing because, Margaret, lots of people suggest that, there needs to be a move out of cities. We need to get closer to the land. That will help us understand our needs better and be better able to deliver, efficient farming technologies that don't pollute.
Microphone, Justin.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. I just came whizzing off Zoom, and I was making a point about where people are located, Do people need to leave cities? A lot of people say cities are really efficient places. There's economic research that says the output of cities is significantly greater. The bigger the cities are, the better it is. Margaret, you work with smaller communities. Do you think the continuing urbanization, the process of urbanization should continue, or is it important that people perhaps stay in smaller communities, something that COVID might encourage, and stay closer to the land? Do you have a view on that?
Well, you mentioned COVID, and what came out of COVID is more of remote working, and people are able to work from wherever they are, and there's no need unnecessarily to be in the city for work, so to speak. So I think that this period that we've just come out of shows us that maybe there isn't a need to continue with urbanization, and that we can actually operate from where we are and find a balance between us and the planet, wherever we're located geographically. It's contentious, I admit, but I think that we've seen that we can definitely operate from different locations without having to be within the city.
And Pete, you seem to have moved to the Pacific, used the cover of COVID to relocate yourself somewhere very glamorous. Let me leave the idea of where we're going to be. And I want to ask you something else, Pete, if I may, which comes from Suzanne Phipps, who says the main way to make a change is to encourage and not preach. How can we get politicians and big businesses to keep encouraging change with their constituents and customers instead of still trying to make a quick buck? So how do you get people to encourage change and not favor making a quick buck? And I think looking at this, actually, can I push this a little bit further and ask you, Pete, is democracy very bad at dealing with long-term problems like climate change? I mean, do we have to think about how democratic societies work? And I think everybody taking part in this discussion, you wouldn't have to think very long to think of countries, perhaps the country you're in, that isn't dealing particularly well with climate change, maybe because of the political leadership, the short-term political leadership, next 4 or 5 years, whatever. Is there an issue with democracy, particularly on this kind of, sending the right message to people issue? Pete.
Okay, I'll answer the first question first, which was about do you make a quick buck or do you get solutions? And the answer to that is, what you can ideally do is you can find solutions that are both profitable and deliver to climate change. So renewable energies is one of those. We look at solar and wind particularly. The unit costs have come way down and they're cheaper than fossil fuels now. So it's actually you mentioned it in your opening statement, I think. It actually makes more economic sense to invest in renewable technologies now. So there doesn't have to be a dichotomy between a solution and something that makes money, and the best ones will find both of them. The second question is about democracy. Democracy, of course, we have 4 or 5 year election cycles, which is not good for making long-term commitments. But what we can do is we can enshrine our ideas about climate change into long-term law. So in the UK and in Scotland, we have net zero commitments out to 2050, and all subsequent governments have to obey those as part of the law because it's the law. Luckily, most of the main countries and most politicians in the country are bought into that. So the way that you get around the fact that you have an election cycle is you don't make it a party political issue as it is in the US. In the UK, it's not a party political issue. There's quite a lot of cross-party buy-in to the solutions, and we set long-term targets. And that's a way of dealing with it.
Pete, that's excellent. And Jim, I'd like to put this to you because we're potentially, I'm full of optimism today, we're potentially a really important moment in tackling climate change. European community have wholeheartedly said that they want to cut carbon. We saw President Xi of China at the UN General Assembly last month say that China would have its carbon neutral pledge by 2060. Japan, South Korea just this week have said that they're signing up to a net zero pledge. And obviously the potential is there next week for the US, if they elect Joe Biden, they would also have an ambitious carbon cutting agenda. And I just pause for a moment and think what that means. I mean, if, say, we had America, Europe and China all signed up, we've already got 50% of world emissions, more than 50% of world GDP, putting its shoulder behind the effort of cutting carbon. I mean, Jim, are we at an important moment where the world is finally getting the message that we need, forget justice just for a moment, but that we do need transition?
Yeah. Just to say, I mean, I do think the Paris Agreement was a kind of turning point, because a lot of people around the world up till then said, you know, this is just fancy. It's not going to happen. And that very, very, very clear agreement, and the number of people who bought into it, and the mention of well below 2 degrees, it turned everybody round, including people in the corporate sector and the multinationals. So I think that mattered a lot. Now, let me see what the bigger challenge is that I think it's great that people are setting net zero targets for 2050. The issue is, how are they actually going to get there? Because not many of them, for example, the Chinese pledge didn't shift the dial at all on 2030. It just upped the ambition for 2060. And this issue of how you get from 2030-ish, 5-10 years from now till that mid-century future, I think is really difficult. It's not very clear to me at the moment.
I just think that's really interesting, because is China, I mean, does anybody, raise a hand, panelists, if you want to comment on this. Is China waiting for the results of the American election before it admits that actually it could be much more ambitious in the short term? That's certainly what some analysts think, that there's a big ceiling that it could begin to cut carbon emissions. There are all sorts of plans for coal plants that it could not go forward with, and amazing ambitions for renewables and nuclear, which would make a big difference for its carbon emissions. I mean, does anybody think that maybe this is a play? They're saying, look, we're going to wait and see how the kind of geopolitical kind of map of the world, falls in the next couple of months, and then they'll deliver their 5-year plan and say what they're going to do. Yeah. Does anybody want to pick up on that? Jim, I've just heard from you, but I'll come back to you briefly if you could.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the answer is I don't know, but just to say that the Chinese take this incredibly seriously, and they're actually invited a lot of experts from other countries in to help them with their next 5-year plan and actually move it onwards. And they have the capability to do better than they have. They have their own modelling that says they can do better. Whether they turn that into a 5-year plan is another question.
I would
get in there, Harriet. Go on.
No, I would just say that I don't think the Chinese government are waiting to see what the US do. I think it's much more likely to be down to what they think their economic recovery will be. What does their economy look like over the next 5 years, and that might be related to wider things we know are happening economy-wide at the moment. I think that's much more likely to be driving them than the US election.
Margaret, to what extent do you think? I mean, notwithstanding that point about the ability of the Chinese to really bear down on emissions, the fact that everybody is now, all these, this is a huge proportion of the world economy now that we see that's making these commitments. Are we in a position to feel? You've gathered that I feel a little, quite optimistic on a number of levels about what's happening. Not saying it's solved, but that there are reasons for being positive. Are you feeling positive about the transition at the moment?
Well, yeah, I have to. That's the only way the transition is going to happen. We have to be positive about it, and we have to commit to going through with the transition. So I think that the moves that are being made by these nations are very necessary, and what they do is going to impact the rest of the world as well, because we don't do things in isolation. So what happens in the US economy, what happens in the European economy is going to affect Africa. Africa is interdependent with these economies. So it's going to be a global impact. So yes, I am feeling positive about the transition, and I'm very optimistic about it. It has to happen.
Yeah, that's great. I'm very glad to hear that. Let me bring in our poll. Our poll result is in. So we've got another one of these Slido polls. Do go to Slido, do vote yourselves and send us questions if you're interested in what we're talking about. You have anything you want to say, do get on to Slido and you can you could shape the discussion yourselves. So the question we asked was, to what extent do you agree that with change, it will be possible to have a future that protects both people and our planet? And half of you, 52%, strongly agree that with change, we will be able to support people and our planet. So like me and Margaret, you're optimistic as well, which I'm glad to hear. Although I have to say, no, actually, we've got 80% either agreeing or strongly agreeing. So that is a very positive result. Pete, do you share that sense of positivity at the moment? You mentioned renewables earlier. We talked about this kind of tally of net zero pledges that we're marking up on our ledger. What do you think, Pete? Are you feeling good from your desert island Erie?
Yeah, it's not really a matter of optimism. It's just that we have to do it. We've got no plan B. We don't have another planet.
Having to do it doesn't mean, I mean, there are probably things that you had to do in your life that you didn't do. That doesn't mean it will happen. So
the question is, can we support both people and the planet? And the question is, the answer is that we cannot support people. We cannot give people a good life unless we have a sustainable planet. So what I'm saying is, if we want to provide a sustainable future for people, a sustainable planet, including us, of course, we're part of the planet, is very much part of the solution. So we have to think about the two things together, and we have to deliver. There is no option not to. Just like we have to breathe to stay alive, it's a necessity. It's not a nicety. So we have to do it.
We're all going to die. We are all going to stop breathing. There is no necessity to breathe. You know, you can stop breathing, and we can screw up the transition. It just seems to me that just because we won't necessarily survive if we don't, doesn't mean it's going to happen. I don't know. I'll just very quickly come back on that, and then I want to turn the corner into a slightly different debate. Pete, anybody want to quickly pick up? I mean, just because we have to do it, if we're going to succeed, doesn't mean it will happen, does it, Harriet?
No, I mean, I think, just if I might say something also a little bit irreverent, I think if we do act on climate change in nature, it will probably be not for those reasons as our priority. We will do it because it makes sense for other reasons, for our health, for our economy, for our well-being, for living in a warm house, for having a nice street that we walk down every day, for a lack of air pollution, all those other issues that are deeply related to climate change and biodiversity. For me, and again, maybe that's a city's perspective, because it's those what are called in the urban arena co-benefits that have really driven climate action, because people can see, act on climate change, we get this as well. You know what, I actually like the get this as well bit more. I sort of like the toy in the cereal packet more than I like the cereal itself. So I'm going out to the shop to buy another box of cereal because I want another one of those toys, right? So it's looking for those, those good bits that come alongside doing stuff which is sometimes quite hard and maybe a little bit boring, like insulation. I mean, it's boring.
But that is actually a very cynical, you're saying human beings are self-interested, that only do it if they think it's going to be a more comfortable environment for themselves.
For themselves, for their community, for their family, for their city, not individually motivated, but motivated by things that otherwise make them tick and otherwise drive them.
Let me see if I can link that to where we want to go, because what I want is to move from that idea of self-interested individuals hopefully doing the right thing to COVID, and what COVID has kind of told us about who we are and the world in which we live, which is the subject of our third poll. And our poll is, do you think that tackling the climate crisis should be a social, political and economic, hold on, there is a COVID thing, social, economic and political priority as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic? So should tackling climate change be a priority as we emerge from tackling climate change? I'm just putting my answer in there because I can't see the other results. And there was a COVID question here. So Carlo says, has COVID affected our carbon footprint? Do you think there are some positive sustainability? There is some positive sustainability of the low carbon emissions during the various global lockdowns that can be harnessed and built on. So, are there important lessons to learn from COVID? I'd like to make that maybe a bit wider and say, do you think COVID has given us pause for thought about our role in the world? Jim, let me direct that one at you. Do you think we've reflected a bit on who we are in the environment in which we live?
Yeah, I think we actually have, because, you know, most people have been, you know, certainly in Europe, for example, have been living a fairly comfortable life. They have not in recent times been really affected by, you know, really global dynamic trends like wars and, you know, some things like that, over which individual people or families or communities don't have control. And this has hit us under COVID for that time. We've lost control. You know, we need to work together and accept changes in behavior in ways that we haven't before. And I think there are analogies with that with climate change, if you can actually tell the story about that. If we don't do something, it's much more slow onset, but if we don't do things about climate change, we will have the same kind of, you know, kind of restrictions and difficulties in the longer term that COVID has created for us. And I know there's another set of questions. I'll stop there, Justin, and no doubt you will pitch something else in.
No, I think this is an important point, and I mean, does anybody else want to pick up on COVID and, you know, whether it has changed people's attitudes, whether we have got that kind of sense of urgency, that kind of wartime sense of purpose, perhaps, that, you know, we do need to do something to kind of influence our relationship with our environment. Do you think it's woken us up a bit?
Yeah, I can jump in there, Justin. I think if we look at just the numbers, if we look at the numbers, carbon emissions fell quite significantly during the, well, I say significantly, by about 17% during the strict lockdown that occurred earlier in the year. But that's only 17%. And so people were asking, you know, where are all the rest of those emissions, and why didn't they also decrease? But since then, we've had a big bounce back in carbon emissions, so they're nearly back to pre-COVID levels. And it's the same with greenhouse gases and air pollutants. They bounce back relatively quickly. So we can't rely on a long-term reduction in emissions due to COVID. But what COVID has done is we're going to need an economic recovery package, right? So the economic recovery package gives us choices. Do we invest in the old technologies, the heavy industries, the emitting industries, or do we invest in technologies for the future and that create more green jobs, for example? And that's the opportunity we've got now. That's a once in a lifetime opportunity, and we shouldn't waste it. We really got a chance here to set going. We've paused, and we can set going on a different path. And that's really what we have to seize that initiative.
And I'm going to jump in on that as well, if I may, which is just to say that I think we've got, you know, I really think that it is a choice ahead of us. It's also a choice about whether our recovery is high capital investment in infrastructure, which is what traditionally we do to get out of recessions. We literally try to build our way out with lots of concrete of all sorts of kinds, projects that need to be done, so on. But those create lots of employment in the short term, but not over the long term. And they're usually not very sustainable jobs. We've got an option here to think about other kinds of infrastructure, green infrastructure, smaller scale technologies. I'll come back to insulation and its boringness, but it needs doing, which create jobs over the long time. So I think we have a choice between an infrastructure-led or an employment-led recovery, and that going to make a big difference to what kind of green jobs we create.
Oh, I've lost the question. Where's it gone? It's vanished. There was somebody asking, Margaret, I was going to direct this at you. They said, are you worried about funding for charities and institutions that support biodiversity as a result of COVID? We've seen huge expenditure kind of supporting our economies around the world. But obviously, we know that lots of charities haven't been receiving the same levels of support that they were before. Lots of organizations have been struggling to do their work. I mean, is that something that worries you? Are we, you know, do we need to try and rescue these organizations and support the work that they're doing?
Yeah, I'm an academic, and looking at funding that's currently coming in, there's been a massive focus on COVID at the moment, and that has been an area of concern in terms of funding for biodiversity and ecology and all the other aspects about our planet. So that is something that we need to be very careful of, and we need to bring out awareness that yes, COVID is here and we need to address it, but we also need to address it at the same time that we're addressing all the other issues in the planet, which are not going away. When we come out of COVID, they are going to still be there. and we need to continue to find those solutions. So we can't afford to slow down the pace at which we are finding solutions. So yeah, I do have concerns in that area, and it's something that needs to be addressed.
There are a couple of questions that have come up on the Slido, which I'm going to just push towards you and see what you say, because there's a question about what changes can we do as individuals to make a difference, but there's one that's a little bit more pointed that I'd like, has got a lot of support from, people on Slido are allowed to vote for which questions they like, and this has got a strong backing. Do you agree that moving towards a plant-based world diet is important in saving the climate and environment from further damaging changes? Pete, soils, agriculture, plant-based diets, do we need to encourage the world to move towards a plant-based diet?
We do. In a word, yes. The vegan diet has the lowest carbon footprint of any diet. So the more plant-based food you have in the diet, the better it is. But the debates come polarized a bit about, I'm a vegan, you're not a vegan, so you're a bad person. I think that we have to get away from that polarized debate. People who aren't ready to make that once in a lifetime decision to never eat meat or dairy again, and there's going to be a lot of those, can still make a contribution by just reducing the amount of meat that they eat and including more fruit and vegetables in their diet.
Harriet, you said earlier, those self-interested city dwellers that you were representing earlier, they're not going to like being told not to eat burgers and chicken, are they? They're going to fight for the right to eat it. And the danger here is that you create a polarized debate where people say, well, I'm not having anyone tell me what I'm going to eat, and therefore I'm not going to engage in the whole issue because I find it, it represents, a nanny state or whatever people will say. These are they're not necessarily it's an important issue, not necessarily the central issue, but can be very divisive and damaging for the long-term objective of tackling climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm now imagining some kind of riot outside of KFC.
Yeah.
Urban chicken eaters kind of storming the barricades with
no, you joke, but
I know, I'm not joking. I mean, I do think that what is really important here, it's like things like holidays. It's like visiting relatives who live far away. I mean, we have to have a sense of proportion. I agree with what Pete's saying. You don't have to give up everything that you like about your life in order to make a contribution to the planet. You can do things in a different way. And also it helps if we work collectively. So institutions, for example, could just not serve meat 3 of the days in their canteens. Probably people would grumble a little bit, but they wouldn't really notice, and they could have meat at home if they wanted to, right? And if you're doing it all together, then maybe it makes much more of a difference. The other thing that we really see in cities happening is lots of food sharing, food waste projects happening at the moment, thousands of them in lots of different places. And that gives people also a sense of community, sense of purpose, something different to do with their lives. So there are other ways of using food to show that different kinds of life could be fun and interesting and enjoyable, and creating different kinds of communities that you want to be part of. So yeah, so more on the good life, less on the chicken riots.
But that, Margaret, is about messaging, isn't it? And, at the end of the day, if we're going to sort this out, as Pete said earlier, up to, depending on which estimates you take, but maybe as much as 1/3 of all emissions from agriculture, agriculture is going to have to deliver some change if we're going to reach these net zero ambitions. And how do you do it without seeming to coerce people and without alienating people from the process itself?
Well, no one likes to be alienated, and no one likes to be dictated to either. That's when you end up with problems. So we have to take a gradual approach, as Harriet and Pete have been speaking about. It has to be a step approach where people make a change and see the benefit, and that motivates the next change and the next change. It is going to have to be stepwise rather than just a sudden no more meat and sudden change. We can't do that. No one is going to buy into that.
So listen, Jim, I'm going to come to you. We've got to wind it up fairly soon, but we've got a very nice question, very charming question from Matthew Moser, who says, and it's very much on message here. He says, how can we go about eliminating the green premium, such as to make, this is the point, sustainable options the logical choice for consumers and decision makers rather than the costly alternative? He also very winningly adds, loving the stream, by the way, so I couldn't ignore him.
Right,
No,
right.
so he says, how can we make sustainability the natural choice for people?
Yeah.
Is pricing something to do? Is that
Yeah, I mean, just to say by that, it may well be that having a healthier diet is actually more expensive to produce. It may actually cost more to do it, and we have to live that. I mean, it's a case, I think, of changing people's expectation of what a normal diet is, to build it into everyday habits and make it customary. Now, there may well be things you can do, like sugar taxes, all these kinds of things that sort of shift the dial a little. But I think it's actually much more shifting people's preferences, as it were, rather than just putting in taxes or prices or whatever to move people along. Because I think that is going to be.
Jump in? Can I just jump? This is a bit rude, but we are running out of time. If all companies accurately measured their carbon emissions, and they were priced, then built in, we got 5 minutes to go, I'm being told, built in to the decisions that people made about, for example, eating meat, would be the fact that we know, for example, cows produce a lot of methane and therefore a big driver of climate change. That would be priced in, and then you'd pay more for it. So it would be rationed by the market, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you've clearly turned from an ethical man to economic liberal man in the last few years, Justin. No, frankly, I don't think it would be enough. I mean, people consume what they do for lots of other reasons rather than just the pure price. I do not think that would be enough by itself, because very often if you price these things in, they're not sort of visible enough to people to make a difference. So you would continue with your habits. Yeah, you need a stronger signal.
You need a strong signal.
Anybody
else want to quickly pick up on that? Now I've got the results of our poll, our latest poll. Does anybody feel strongly about this idea of, whether the role in which the market pricing should take? If greenhouse gases and their effect on the environment is what they call in economics an externality. If you begin to price that in, does the system then begin to, appropriately apportion, a price to that externality, the cost of the damage that greenhouse gases? You look so skeptical, Harry.
Yeah, I am very skeptical. I just don't think markets work that perfectly, and that most of the things that we, especially around food, it's so cultural. I mean, we don't eat turkey at Christmas because of the price, right? We eat it for a reason. We don't eat bacon for breakfast because of its price.
Well, actually,
we used to, maybe.
No, we used to eat goose, and then turkey's a cheaper meat. So actually, turkey maybe is. I don't know.
I'm not saying that price is immaterial to how people eat. Of course it is, and we know very well that many people don't have enough money to feed themselves in a way that they would want to, right? And that is desperately sad in so many different. It's a desperate issue that we need to deal with. But I just don't think a carbon market can work perfectly enough to get us there. You could think instead about changing the terms of ownership. If you want people to have access to green technologies, green cars, scooters, and so on. If you want to get into the market,
that may happen naturally. We're getting some quite subversive ideas, and this debate could go on and on. We've got our poll result, which I'm very quickly got to give you. I've only got a minute left. Do you think tackling climate crisis should be a political and economic priority as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic? Overwhelmingly, 98% of you said yes, which is obviously the right answer in the context of the discussion. Very quickly, guys, could you quickly give me one word, one thing that people can do if they want to, do their bit to try and solve the climate crisis, a just transition? Let me go through you one by one. Pete, first, one word, priority for people.
Fly less, eat less meat.
Okay, that's two things. Margaret, your half pen worth.
Watch your waste.
Watch your waste, very good. And I'm making it harder for the people at the end because all the good things have been taken. Harriet, tell me, what do you think?
I think tell somebody else that you care about it and get them to care about it too.
That's an interesting one. Jim?
Yeah, 3 words. Agree with Pete. You got it just right.
That's excellent. We're going to have to bring the conversation to a close, and I felt I've overrun very slightly, but I hope you all agree out there that it's been fascinating. I certainly think it has. It's been great to hear from you what you think is important, both through the polls, but also crucially through those questions. I know there's one questioner whose surname I pronounced absolutely appallingly, and I apologize for that. Thank you all for joining us. Do continue the conversation on social media with the hashtag #YouAndThePlanet. As I said at the beginning, this is the 5th event in the You and Your Planet series. You can catch up with all the others which were held in sort of glamorous locations around Britain. This is the first online one, but you can catch up with them on the Royal Society website. Got a few more things to do. Please take a few minutes to complete the evaluation survey in the YouTube description. And I hope, like one of our questioners, you enjoyed it. The next event in the series will focus on the opportunities provided by technology, which, as you've gathered, I'm quite enthusiastic about in combating climate change and biodiversity loss. This will be streamed live here on the Royal Society website on the 3rd of December. We very much look forward to seeing you then. We do hope you've enjoyed it. Can I finally just thank our contributors, Pete Smith, Harriet Bulkley, Margaret Taddy, and Jim Skier. Ski. Jim Ski, for taking part in this. I do hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I thought that was fascinating and great fun, a real romp through the just transition there with the Royal Society. Thank you very much indeed.